Welcome back to our special Donald Trump versus history, where we're just analyzing some parallels of the era we're living in right now and Donald Trump with other presidents in the past. I want to go to David Keene. He's the editor-at-large for the Washington Times. He was the chair of the American Conservative Union from 1984 to 2011 and also president of the National Rifle Association of America. Mr. Keene, how are you, sir?
Just fine, thank you.
Good to talk to you. So you wrote an article about how Donald Trump is similar in ways to Teddy Roosevelt. Walk us through that. What are some parallels you see?
Well, in many ways, I was asked, as all of us have been, has there been any parallel to Donald Trump? And I suggested that perhaps he's simply the reincarnation of Teddy Roosevelt in many ways. Roosevelt designated his successor, in fact, and then got upset with him. He was very thin-skinned. He was very opinionated. Reminds you of Donald Trump in some ways. He then claimed he was going to go after him and be a reelected president, but he couldn't get the nomination. The Republican establishment at the time considered him an existential threat to the democracy. Mark Twain said he was the worst president in American history, and he claimed they stole the nomination from him. And in his mind, that justified his running as an independent. So there are many parallels there. But every time we have a presidential election, we have, and it's increasing in recent years, but we have this suggestion that for either side to lose represents an existential threat to the Constitution, to democracy, the continuation of the American way of life. And this year, one would think that rhetoric, listening to many of the pundits, is something that's new. In fact, it's been going on since the beginning of the Republic. Back in the day, as they say, Thomas Jefferson thought that John Adams, and expressed it often, that John Adams was really a monarchist in disguise, and that if he were president, he'd jettison the Constitution, the constitutional guarantees, the balance of power, and demand that we return to a monarchy. Adams, on the other hand, expressed the fear that Thomas Jefferson was basically a French Jacobin under the skin, and that if he were president, that we'd have the guillotine and a revolution of the sort that shook up France in the 1780s. Of course, neither of those things happened. This has gone on time and time again. Political rhetoric often is much more inflammatory than the reality behind it. So we had yesterday the Washington Post editorializing about what they should do now and suggesting, well, the Trump people may have won, but it's not like it's the end of democracy. A week or so ago, they claimed that it would be the end of the democracy if Trump was elected. So this isn't new. We've had several instances in the past where it's been just as cantankerous between the parties and the candidates as it is today.
I like that point. What about within the party? You mentioned that people in Teddy Roosevelt's party did not care much for him. What did they not like about Teddy?
They didn't like the fact that he didn't play ball with them. They didn't like the fact that he openly disdained parts of the Constitution. He suggested, in fact, that if the Supreme Court disagreed with him, he ought to be able to take it to the public and let the public decide whether the court was right or he was right. He was bombastic. He went after his enemies. And we remember him now as a great president because he accomplished great things. But he wasn't all that popular going into his reelection. And we often, as we look back on history, we in our own minds at least revise things to be consistent with what we think about presidents today. The party at the time believed that while they couldn't win in a three-way race with Roosevelt in the race, that wasn't the goal anyway, that they had to do what they could to make sure that, as one of them put it, that madman doesn't get back into the White House. So that you might say that the Republican establishment of that era was never Teddy, just like as parts of the Republican establishment in this era have become never Trump. And that sort of thing happens when you have a massive change of direction, either within a party or between the parties.
Let's bring it to more modern times. Do you see any parallels between Donald Trump and maybe a Reagan or a Nixon that you think are lessons we can learn?
Well, there's obviously a parallel with Nixon in that he came back. You remember when Nixon lost the last time, and then the governorship in California, he held a press conference and said, "Well, at least you won't have Dick Nixon to kick around anymore." Pretty soon, he was president of the United States. So that comeback, in some ways, parallels the Trump victory. But if you look back a little further, you come to the only president who now, the only other president who was elected to 2 terms, but not consecutively, and that was Grover Cleveland, who ran against was first defeated by Benjamin Harrison, and then came back 4 years later to defeat him. That too was a case where Cleveland didn't get along with either party. At the time, it was a time of party bosses, a time of elected officials doing what the bosses wanted, and Grover Cleveland, whether he was the best or the worst or the medium president, was a candidate and a president who everybody says was not someone who would play political favors on the issue. So he came back and won a second term. And there's a great parallel there. The other one would be Andrew Jackson, who in his first run won a plurality of both the Electoral College and the popular vote, but didn't get to a majority. It was thrown into the House, and then historians believe it was a corrupt deal was essentially made, brokered by then Senator Henry Clay, so that Jackson was denied the presidency. He went out, remade his party, came back, and won the presidency the next time around.
Remake the party is an interesting thing you threw in there as well. I think we're seeing a lot of remaking of the parties right now. So my last question for you, what would your advice be to Donald Trump to not repeat some mistakes that have been made in the past by some of the 44 other presidents, perhaps? What historical wisdom can you provide in this time that we're living in now?
Well, we're in a period now, and all of these kinds of contests seem to take place when there's some big shift going on. The two parties are changing their constituencies. The Democratic Party has driven working people and other folks out and has disdain for them. Donald Trump has sort of emerged as their spokesperson and their representatives. He cannot forget that part of his job is to bind that together so that you don't just have support for a Republican candidate, in this case, Donald Trump, but that as he leaves in 4 years, that he leaves a party that on its own can mobilize those same constituencies and win elections in the future.
Yes, has to outlive him. David A. Keene, editor-at-large of the Washington Times. Good to talk to you, Mr. Keene. Thanks for your insight.
Thank you.